Welcome back to the Jaco Report. Crime has been declining overall for decades, but in St. Louis and other cities, violent crime has been climbing last year and so far this year. Last month, for example, the murder rate in the city of St. Louis, which is the number of murders per 100,000 people, that murder rate was 5 times that of Chicago and 21 times that of New York City. Our guest today represents one of the city's areas hardest hit by violent crime. It's the 21st Ward, which runs south of Interstate 70 in the area surrounding O'Fallon Park on the city's north side, and it's represented by our guest, Alderman Antonio French. Alderman, welcome back to the show. Thanks for coming in.
And thanks for having me.
So, is this an aberration? What's going on in the neighborhoods represented by your ward where one sees, you know, the overall crime rate has been going down, but the rate of violent crime is starting to spike again? What's the dynamic going in here that you see? Because I know you've been Mr. Law and Order. You've posted these remote control cameras all over the ward to try to keep an eye on things. But what's happening?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, we instituted this surveillance camera system. It's the largest surveillance system in the city. And it's been very effective in that area where we install the surveillance cameras. Homicides have dropped 80% in those areas. Last year, we took in a new portion in the ward after redistricting. Every 10 years, we redistrict, we draw the wards. Right. And we picked up a new section called College Hill neighborhood.
So that's now yours?
Yeah, so that's mine. So our surveillance system hasn't expanded to that section yet. And in the last few weeks, there's been what police have described as a gang feud. And it's been very violent. In one 7-day period, we had 6 shootings, which included 2 homicides. And so, you know, we really called it a crisis. We haven't been able to expand the surveillance system over there quick enough, but, you know, police have responded. They flooded that area with officers.
I was about to say, the cops flooded that area. They've made a few dozen arrests on everything from outstanding warrants to, you know, public disorder. Is that the way to do this when you get a spike in an area? Just flood it with cops? I mean, it's not going to be permanent, but that cuts down the crime rate temporarily. Does it help keep it down?
Well, I think when you have a crisis like we had, which involved an ongoing gang feud, it was important for police to come into that area and make some key arrests. Really, you need to get those few guys who are involved in that violence, which keeps going back and forth, killing one guy on one side, one guy on the other side. Police came in and stopped that, at least temporarily. The question is going to be once the number of police goes down, because it's not sustainable to have that many police in that area for eternity. When that goes down, we hope that some of the arrests they've made will have some lasting effects.
Now, you're a strong supporter of Board of Alderman President Lewis Reed, who's running for mayor against incumbent Francis Slay. So having said that up front, what do you think of the police department and the administration's response to this uptick so far? I mean, what I've heard is they say what's obviously true, which is the overall crime rate has been declining for quite some time. But is that a sufficient response to this spike? How do you think their reaction's been? Well,
first, you know, for the idea that crime has been dropping for years, you know, that takes in a measure of every crime committed, from murder to, you know, petty theft. The fact is that violent crime is still way too high in the city of St. Louis. We've had the same number of homicides in 2012 as we did in 2011, and that's a much higher rate than, as you mentioned earlier, Chicago or New York. So violent crime remains high and has been for many, many years. One of my you know, beefs with the administration has always been that I don't think they've taken the issue of crime, especially violent crime in some of our north side neighborhoods, as seriously as they should. You know, it is an election season, and so a lot of times it becomes a case of the squeaky wheel gets the oil, and with the crisis that we had in College Hill, we raised a lot of red flags, a lot of attention. We had news cameras down there. We went knocking on doors, trying to get community organized, and so there was a response. Maybe that has something to do with there's an election in 30 days, I don't know. But the effect is the same, and we appreciate that the police came and calmed it down. Like I said, the real test is going to be what happens after they leave.
Talk to me about the larger picture here. Why do you think the violent crime rate historically in St. Louis has been intractable? Because here's how the argument breaks down. On one hand, people will say, well, it's, quote, those people who live there, exterior of their circumstances, they've made personal choices, and this is their fault. Others will say, well, wait a minute, no, these people are victims of a lousy economy, a blown-out neighborhood, et cetera, et cetera. Is it both? Is it all one or the other? In your mind, because you've observed this both as a community activist and an elected official, What is going on here where we can't seem to reduce this overall rate of violent crimes in the city?
Yeah, so first, I've heard that same sentiment that somehow it's those people and crime in those neighborhoods are their problem.
And it's always going to be there, so why bother doing anything about it?
Yeah, and I don't agree with that attitude at all. One, I think that the most violent neighborhoods that we have in the city of St. Louis, and most of the homicides do happen north of Del Mar. But this is one city. This is one city. And so when people hear about 113 people murdered in the city of St. Louis, you know, they don't say, well, did it happen in the north part or the south part? You know, crime anywhere affects us all. And I think the mistake that we've made as a city is not addressing the needs of those neighborhoods. Those neighborhoods have suffered from all kinds of neglect for you know, decades here. And so what we see is that violent crime becomes a symptom of more systematic problems in those neighborhoods. Lack of city services, high degree of vacancy, high degree of unemployment, low education, closing of schools, closing of anchor facilities. So this has been going on for many, many years, and especially in the case of a neighborhood like College Hill. If you at all subscribe to the broken window theory, if you drive through College Hill, you can count the number of non-broken windows.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's easier to do.
It is so much.
Well, where does this leave us then if you've got a large amount of the city's population that's made up of, in the 21st century economy, is sort of surplus labor? You know, these guys don't have the education or the skills to compete in the global workforce. There aren't a lot of jobs for them. The neighborhoods are devastated. I mean, it's a closed loop, and it's going to continue to get worse.
Well, I'm a little bit more optimistic, but that is our challenge. Our challenge is, what do we do with this group, this current generation of young men, and the generation right behind them that are coming up? They're 11 and 12 years old right now, that aren't getting a world-class education. We aren't supplying them with the tools that they need to be successful, at least in a legal way. And so that's going to be our challenge, is to start putting resources in these neighborhoods. You mentioned I'm a supporter of Lewis Reed. It's one of the reasons, is because I think that we do need a change. We do need a focus on some of these neighborhoods and what is the root cause of violence.
So how much can a city government actually do in a lot of these neighborhoods if you've got, you don't have the education skills to match up with the jobs. You don't have the jobs at all. You've got busted up neighborhoods. You've got broken families. You've got an education system that's collapsed. How much of that is amenable to intervention by a civic government?
I think we can do a lot. I think just in my 4 years in the area that I've had control over for 4 years, we've seen a great change in the Penrose and O'Fallon neighborhood. So I'm very optimistic what we can do in College Hill, bringing some of those same tools over there. But we should never write some of these acts off and say that poverty is the cause. People have been poor for a long time, and that is never an excuse to engage in violent activity like that we've seen over in College Hill. So I don't give any of those young men that excuse. But we as a government need to do more to provide some options for them, especially focusing on education, after school programs, so that we can start from when they're very young and get them set on the right track.
Alderman Antonio French. Alderman, a pleasure as always. Thank you very much for coming in.
Absolutely.
When we return, some final thoughts on some close encounters. Stay with us, won't you please? The Jaco Report. We'll be right back.